Teachers of Reddit, how are you feeling about doing in-person classes right now? I'm an elementary teacher and this feels like one of those situations where there's just not a great answer. If we teach from home, I worry about how effective that teaching will be, how parents will manage that arrangement alongside their jobs. But if we do go back to school, all roads seem to lead to some form of madness. 1. What happens if I contract COVID? Do I need to have 2 weeks of lessons prepared for a substitute at all times? Can there possibly be enough substitute teaching candidates out there to fill all the gaps left by COVID diagnosis, or suspected COVID diagnosis, or contact with COVID? Substitutes already do not make a living wage for their work, or if they do, it's barely so. I can't imagine they are going to be more enthusiastic about going to schools under these circumstances. 2. What happens if my significant other, also a teacher, at a different school, comes into direct contact with a student at her school who has COVID? Do I have to quarantine because I've had direct contact with someone who has had direct contact with someone who has COVID? 3. Our state released standards that basically said that if a student or employee shows a sign of COVID, they've got to go until they can prove they're clear. Signs include coughing. We obviously wouldn't send someone home for a random throat clearing cough. But what about when other sicknesses start popping up as winter nears? Will colds be presumed covered until proven otherwise? 4. Our state mentioned that teachers should socially distance from students. How do I effectively teach 5th graders from 6 feet away at all times? 5. I worry about my ability to communicate effectively for an entire day through a mask, considering the difficulties some of my students already had with listening. Add a socially distanced element that's likely going to have some of my students extended all the way to the back of the classroom, and I'm a bit concerned on that front. 6. Selfishly, I've wondered where my breaks and planning time would fit. There's been talks about eliminating specials, things like gym, art, library, etc., and keeping students in the same room all day, including lunchtime and perhaps recess. How do I get away for my own lunch or off-duty break/plan time? 7. If we split schedules, some kids come on some days, some on others. How in the world will transportation work for those guys? A local district concluded that buses would have to make 8 runs to pick up kids in a socially distanced manner. 8. Bathroom breaks/tissue/drinks. Kids are kind of gross already. To maintain top-flight cleanliness and social distancing, I feel an inordinate amount of class time will be devoted to routines. I envision super long bathroom breaks so everyone has a chance to have the bathroom to themselves. Time out of every hour to clean or wipe down laptops, manipulatives, desks, etc. We already spend a lot of time on routines, pre-covered, so doubling down makes me wonder exactly how much time will be left to actually try to teach. 9. What happens under a worst case scenario situation? Our student body has a lot of grandparents standing in as primary guardians. What happens if a student contracts COVID at school and takes it home to their advanced age primary caretaker? Is our small community prepared to take responsibility for the preventable death of a student's primary guardian? 10. If we go hybrid, some home, some online, who's in charge of managing each system? Curating online content was a job in and of itself. So how could a teacher be expected to go through full school days and then prepare online options for every subject? And how do we ensure those two components perfectly align? I hate that we've been trained to believe that having breaks and prep time is selfish. It's not. It's essential to doing our job well. I have all the same feelings you shared here. It just struck me that you said it's selfish to think about breaks when other jobs have them protected by law. Absolutely. Hit the nail on the head. We should not wonder if we will be back quote-on for hours at a time. Eek. In the UK, English secondary schools are due back in full in September with no expectations of social distancing and very little guidance for risk assessment. I work in the worst affected borough of London, where huge numbers of our kids have lost family members. Over 50% of kids live in poverty. We have the highest levels of gang crime, radicalization, sex trafficking, child abuse, and neglect. And only around 5-10% of kids in classes have had access to internet for remote learning since we went into lockdown in March. Many I haven't heard from at all. Social services and child protective services are already overwhelmed. I'm worried for myself and my colleagues as we enter precarious working conditions. But mostly I worry for the kids and their community. We cannot go back to normal and many will be deeply traumatized. When I try to talk about how anxious I feel, nobody in my family or friendship group understands. They just tell me to stop worrying and enjoy my summer break. My wife is a principal, and she's been at her school every day, including during the lockdown/quarantines, trying to figure this out. I fear for her health and safety. especially her mental and emotional well-being. I see the enormous amounts of stress being put upon her, and it kills me that I can't help. There are some truly cruel parents/people out there who feel they can treat my wife and her staff like trash because, well, I don't know why. I'd imagine most are just as frustrated as she is, and they are just taking it out on the school. But some are just self-centered, entitled assholes. Why make an already difficult situation harder? Despite what some might believe, teachers and staff haven't been lounging around at home, mailing it in and collecting pay. If anything, they're working harder and longer than ever, given almost no notice. Teachers and administrators had to completely redesign what school looks like almost overnight, and they succeeded. Kids were learning. Children were being fed. Needs were being met in the midst of a global crisis. No state agency did that. No so-called national experts on curriculum. The local educators fixed it in hours. Our government, with its infinite power, wealth, and resources, has done nothing but pretend the problem doesn't exist. In fact, state and federal policies actually made things more difficult, but local schools figured out how to get around that, too. No complaining, no protesting, just solutions and amazingly clever plans. Remember that the next time someone tries to convince you that teachers don't deserve better pay and benefits, remember that the next time someone tells you that teachers have it easy, or try to persuade you that educators are not among the smartest, most ingenious people in our society. I have very mixed feelings. I really miss my students, and can't wait to see them. I know that online learning isn't the same, but I also fear for their health and the health of their families. Perfectly summed up right here. I'm a speech pathologist, so while not a teacher, I do consider myself an educator. I provided services via telehealth from March through June, and continue to do so for those students who require summer services. 2 of my kids have highly intensive needs, so I see them at their home once a week now, which is terrifying. But it's what they need to make progress. The way I see it is, in March, I'm in New York, so I'm going on that timeline. We had to learn a completely different way of doing things. It was hard for the educators and the students, especially the students. So to me, going back to in-person learning is not the best choice, as it will look very different from in-person learning in the past. It's a lot of change for anyone, let alone young children. And if the numbers go up, we close all over again. I truly do not believe it is worth it. I understand the fact that many people rely on schools as childcare, but I also think that it is up to the government to handle that. High hopes. I know, I have many ideas on this whole thing that I could go on and on about, but that's just my 2 cents. My school's speech pathologist just bought some neat masks with clear front panels, basically part of a plastic face shield, but in mask form on Etsy, so kids can see her mouth moving, and her facial expressions. Super smart. College professor here. I really miss the wonderful classroom dynamics that in-person learning makes possible. Online learning makes discussions more strained and shallow. I also really love working with my students and discussing their projects one-on-one. That is much harder to do remotely. However, I care about my students as people, and the thought of making them and their families sick by returning to campus too soon makes me very worried. I want them to get a good education, but not at the expense of their health and well-being. I would rather work twice as hard to make online learning successful than risk them getting sick or losing parents and grandparents to this illness. I'm a K-grade teacher in France, so sorry for my English. It's holidays now, but after the quarantine we had our students in class again. First with distanciation for a few weeks, then without. Distanciation rules were stopped for the youngest the last 2 weeks of school. It was not that difficult to teach them distanciations, because only a few of them came back to school. It was not mandatory, so the first week I had only 6 students. I usually have 29. Then I had more and more. They had no difficulties to adapt, and were allowed to bring toys from home to play on their own during recess. They were sad not to have their friends, and it was a bit difficult to teach them, because our stuff in the class, pencils, book, games, were common. We didn't even have a table for each of them. I only had 4 round tables. I had to buy some stuff with my money, so they would have their own white slate, for example. We had to make them wash their hand a lot. It took a lot of time at their arrival, before entering the classroom, to sync for about 90 students. It'd take time. Then before and after recess. Before and after lunch, the cafeteria was closed, so they had a picnic in the class. Then before and after the afternoon recess. Then before leaving for home. And every time before and after they had to use the bathroom, they sneeze or cough. And it was a bit difficult to make them keep the rule all day long. Every day 4 weeks, and at the same time, to see them eating lunch at each other's home. having sleepover, parents and kids being all in group, without distanciation as soon as they leave the school area, a lot of works for not much. The only great things was having a small group of children. They made a great progress, because I had much more time for each of them. Also having a mask all day, while talking a lot in a hot day was difficult. I admire those who have it every day, no matter their work. It was also hard to hear some of them stories. One of my student had her parents divorced just before the pandemic. The father didn't have time to live. They were having arguments all day long, and he even jumped from the window in front of the child, from the first floor. He was okay then being violent with the mother, and another one came back saying he was afraid his janitor could come back kidnapping him again. So sad. But I'm glad they told me now they are both safe. Thanks for sharing that perspective. The issue is that all these parents want us to go back to normal school, but fail to realize school will not be normal. No good morning hugs and high fives. No fun projects with partners. No team building activities like Marshmallow Tower or Saving Fred. No independent centers with shared materials. No shared technology permitted. No library books. No playground equipment. No classroom helper jobs, paper passer, librarian, board eraser, etc. No restorative circles with an actual talking piece. No special handshake to start class. No reading with a teddy bear or on a floor pillow. No switching seat privileges. No cafeteria antics. No visible smiling, masks. No teacher's chair privileges. No kinda buddies. My class always helps in pre-K and kinda with a ton of stuff. No group counseling in the very small counselor's office. The list goes on. My year can't be done in person, because what makes teaching in person so incredible won't be allowed or possible. Exactly this. The vision of socially distanced, mask-wearing kindergartners all isolated together breaks me. It is not a question of whether learning happens in vs out of the building. There is no normal to go back to. Our start date got pushed back 2 weeks. Then it's 9 weeks online. That buys 11 weeks to figure out the smart thing to do next. There will be plenty of data from the schools that are pushed to open sooner. Can someone explain why the White House isn't doing mask optional public tours if schools are being pushed to open? Can someone explain why the White House isn't doing mask optional public tours if schools are being pushed to open? It is worth noticing that the same political party that has consistently defunded public schools for the last 20 years is now pushing a policy that is resulting in teachers choosing if their health is more important than their job, and parents to consider if face-to-face learning is so superior to remote learning that it is worth potentially dying for. Teachers will quit, less students will be in schools, and slowly, perhaps as soon as December, some schools will be permanently closed. Watch. Oh. And masks will still be worn at the White House. Yes. The defunding police is dangerous. It's absolutely true that students are not learning well in remote learning. But it's even more completely true that if we start having classes in person, if one person has coronavirus, we are going to spread it. My district has voted for a blended learning model that has half the kids in the building at a time. But our hallways and bathrooms are big enough for true social distancing. And even if they were, even adults are not doing well with perfect mask compliance. And children are definitely not going to manage it. I'm just hoping that my district changes their mind as we get closer to the start date. If not, hope is that when enough people get sick, they'll have to close. And maybe I can avoid being in that first wave of illness if I'm extremely scrupulous in my own mask usage and hand washing, and also get lucky. This is absolutely unsafe. Teachers are going to be dying by mid-September. If one of them is me, my dying wish is this. If you hear anyone, in any place or context, refer to teachers as heroes in association with COVID-19, I want you to boo really loudly for a long time, including at funerals, especially at funerals. Thank you for the permission to be salty at the funerals. Seriously, maybe the teachers who step into this fray are courageous, but it's because the people deciding they must are cowards. My kid's district is going back like nothing happened, maybe with some masks at the adult's discretion. It makes me sick. I'm withdrawing her from enrollment. I will not be part of murdering teachers and children for the sake of the almighty dollar. Period. I'm terrified. I work at a high school in Texas. Last year my largest class had 36 students. Between kids not having school supplies, passing in the hallways, gym, sports, discipline, and teenage hormones, I know for a fact that social distancing and keeping things clean can't work. If full-grown adults refuse to wear a mask, then imagine 1,000s of teenagers. Our school has a daycare too, with babies. It's too risky, and it's unfair to ask us to risk not only our lives, but the lives of our students. This is not a hoax. There is no getting back to normal. We either have to accept it, or risk certain death. I'm not exaggerating with any of this. My wife's county have voted on an in-person/virtual plan, which means she will have to go to school every day of the week. She's stressed. She wants to do all virtual for at least the first semester. She misses regular school, but the stress of all of these procedures and risk is too much. Why should she have to risk her health for this? She's not a doctor treating someone sick. She's an underpaid teacher who is capable of teaching online. Parents should be yelling at their places of work or their governments instead of the school systems if they aren't able to work from home and accommodate their kids' virtual learning. Instead, teachers are getting blamed once again for this setup, and parents don't give two shits about their health and safety. Bro, it's stupid. The entire education system is a problem. Yeah, right. Horrible. The local district has decided to carry on classes like normal, but everyone wears a face mask. The issue is cannot social distance. With room dimensions, you cannot space 25 to 30 people 6 feet apart, no matter how you attempt to organize them. We are assholes to armpit scissors, and those little pieces of fabric aren't enough. Yup. How can you socially distance when your student population at one high school is over 1500 kids? It's impossible. Man, my HS was over 5,000 at its peak. Can't imagine how much of a disaster that would be now. Terrified. I'm almost 40, but in very good health. Many of the people I work with are older, and are not the healthiest. Based on the numbers and the size of our school, going back to school means we will be burying 4 to 5 children, and 1 to 2 teachers. If a teacher tests positive for COVID-19, is S/he required to quarantine for 2 to 3 weeks? Is her/his sick leave covered? Paid? If that teacher has 5 classes a day with 30 students each, do all 150 of those students need to then stay home and quarantine for 14 days? Do all 150 of those students now have to get tested? Who pays for those tests? Are they happening at school? How are the parents being notified? Does everyone in each of those kids' families need to get tested? Who pays for that? What if someone who lives in the same house as a teacher tests positive? Does that teacher now need to take 14 days off of work to quarantine? Is that time off covered? Paid? Where is the district going to find a substitute teacher who will work in a classroom full of exposed, possibly infected students for substitute pay? Substitutes teach in multiple schools. What if they are diagnosed with COVID-19? Do all the kids in each school now have to quarantine and get tested? Who is going to pay for that? What if a student in your kid's class tests positive? What if your kid tests positive? Does every other student and teacher they have been around need to quarantine? Do we all get notified who is infected and when? Or because of HIPAA regulations, are parents and teachers just going to get mysterious may have been in contact emails all year long? How will it affect students and faculty when the first teacher in their school dies from this? The first parent of a student who brought it home? The first kid? They're basically going to wing it. 2 words. Fuck this. I love and miss my kids, but I don't want them/their families/me/my family to get sick. I'm in Taiwan, so we've been in person teaching all along. We have so few cases it's probably unnecessary to keep wearing masks and spacing the students out, but we are continuing anyway, and it drives me nuts that people have decided that masks are optional now. To be fair, the school year ended yesterday, and the government technically didn't say anything about cram schools, which are after school education programs. So they are not breaking a government mandate by forgetting their masks. I will continue wearing a mask until I'm absolutely convinced the risk is close to 0. So probably until it's eradicated here, or there's a vaccine. All it takes is one asymptomatic super spreader, or one selfish jerk breaking quarantine, to fuck it up for everyone. Also, I teach at 5 or 6 different locations every week, so if I did get it, I'd be responsible for spreading it around the entire district. In New Zealand we stopped for 7 weeks. But we have been back for 5 weeks, and it has been great. Best time for teaching I have ever had. Not a teacher, but I don't understand why states don't delay the start until after Labor Day to give schools a better chance to make arrangements, and to see if things are getting better or worse. Kansas actually just made that decision, and won't be starting until after Labor Day. As a Missouri teacher, I'd wholeheartedly support us following their lead. TBH, I'm terrified to go back, and I've been dealing with a lot of anxiety around the pandemic this whole time. The thought of going back to college, where the students are going to continue throwing huge parties, and not giving a shit, and then coming to class, to infect everyone else absolutely freaks me out. I'd love to assure you that you're overreacting, but you're not. My friend is a college professor, and received an email saying the school planned on resuming in-person classes. Please let the university know if that's a problem for you, so they can find a replacement. Check r/teachers and you will see our extreme anxiety and disgust toward a system that wants to move things too quickly without taking the necessary precautions. I'm sad that people like to use our kids as some sort of emotional argument in politics. Think about your kids, and then turn around and push for defunding education, and saying that kids dying is a fact of life. If we can continue things as normal, I care that my kids are safe, over whether they get a sense of things being back to normal. I'm sick of seeing people call us lazy and claim we want online learning, because it's easier when it in fact takes much more time to implement. I miss my students so much, and wish I could snap my fingers and make COVID go away, but I can't. We have already lost some staff members from COVID and a bunch of my kids have lost family members. I'll be damned if I lose any more friends or God forbid lose any of my kids through our government's complete apathy and negligence. So if I could sum up my feelings, extremely pissed. The ones who say online is easy really grind my gears. I've had bad online college classes, so I see where it comes from, but it can be done well. But not only is it harder to implement in the first place, it's harder to make valid assessments and harder to adjust on the fly. In a physical classroom it takes 30 seconds to scan my 30 students for the informal cues of engagement and understanding. That's simply not possible online. I'm currently teaching in a virtual summer camp, where I had 2 months to prep 16 contact hours and holy shit this is hard. I'm a HS teacher in the South. Very pro-Trump. COVID hoax. Anti-mask area. Our governor basically just told the schools that they will open full time because the CDC is just guidelines. I know many teachers that are dreading going back because of the risk. SC has notoriously mistreated the education system. We've always been underfunded, but now it's really bad. If you're religious, pray for us. If you're not, do whatever it is you do. The thing that I hate the most is that people are stuck thinking that this choice between keeping schools closed vs risking infection is a reasonable one. In so many other countries they have flattened the curve enough to open schools and not risk infection. Instead of blaming the government for its colossal failure, we keep engaging in this debate that we should not even be forced to have. I'm a 32-year-old healthy-looking male who gets immunosuppressing infusions to treat ulcerative colitis. I teach middle school, and the thought of being in a poorly ventilated classroom with 25 sixth graders is terrifying. I have no desire to die and leave my 2 small children fatherless. I don't see any way that in-person classes will work with how poorly our country has handled this pandemic. Edit forgot to add Betsy Davis can go fuck herself. I'm a school librarian at an elementary school with 900 students. I'm young. I have no children. I'm healthy. I'm fucking terrified. I may love being a hero to your kids, but I did not sign up to be an actual knowingly lay down your life hero. The fact that so many are urging us to go back to protect the economy shows just how fucked this whole system is. Staying home is absolutely causing trauma for everyone, staff and students. But will it cause more trauma when their teacher, principal, para, custodian dies? Not to mention their grandma or aunt or parents or classmate. Only 0.2% of kids will die devastates. In my district, that means 4 student deaths in a district of 5 schools. Not to mention the teachers or family members. I'm fucking terrified. It's ironic the boards of ed that are making these decisions are meeting by video conference, not in person in groups, and staying in groups for 8 hours a day. I have close teacher friends and I think what they are being asked to do is insane. Parents can choose for students to go back or not, and then teachers will be asked to conduct and manage in-person classes while zooming and managing/teaching online learners at the same time. And get this, with school shootings they did away with backpacks for security. Now to encourage social distancing there are no lockers issued at high school level. So guess what? Back to allowing backpacks. Fuck physical security I guess. All while disinfecting all items between classes during a 5-minute passing period. With what? Who buys the supplies? Teachers again. So many unanswered questions and bullshit plans that they have no business opening on schedule. Feeling angry. The number of precautions that need to be taken for COVID-19 that directly go against precautions for school shootings is pretty daunting. Things like doors left open instead of doors closed and locked at all times comes to mind too. Yep, and open windows. We are not supposed to open our windows for security reasons, but that's one of the CDC guidelines for schools reopening. I teach in a middle school of about 1,000 kids. There is literally no safe way to do it. We are supposed to start in a few weeks and we have no idea how things will work. I love my kids and I know they have tough home lives. There is nothing I would love more than to have them back in my classroom. But if we go back to in-school learning in any form, people will die. Parents will send sick kids to school. Sometimes because they are asymptomatic and they have no idea they are sick. Or they know their kids are positive, but they have to go to work, so they'll send them anyway. I don't want my students to die. I don't want to watch my coworkers die. I don't want to hear about the families of my students and coworkers dying. I don't want to die. Maybe I wouldn't die, but if I got sick and passed it along to others who died, I could never forgive myself. I could talk all day about how stressed we teachers are and all the reasons why going back to in-person school wouldn't work. It boils down to this. People will die. Those that don't die could have permanent heart, lung, or cognitive function damage. It's not worth it to go back until people get their shit together and wear their fucking masks, so cases will go down. I work at the college level. No, just no. I don't trust my school or my students to take the necessary steps to keep us all safe. I'm not a teacher, but both of my parents are. They've called a lawyer to draft up a will in preparation for going back to school in the fall. Short answer, but I'm in a unique position, but my dad died from the virus. I hate it. I got sent home this week and told to come back in September because I keep having breakdowns over kids telling me there is no virus, or that it only kills old people. UKBTW, where we are so severely hit. Honestly, I can't be at work right now. I'm too scared and too angry and deep within mourning.